chairman of this meeting, this being the first meeting of the new civic year. Do I have any nominations for the chair of the meeting? Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much. I'd like to nominate Councillor Paul Osborne. He led us very efficiently through the last.
Is it on? Is it on? Sorry, I wasn't sure it was on. It didn't seem to come across the sign. Sorry, Councillor.
Can I repeat that?
Yes, please.
Seconded.
Sorry, after telling everybody they should do it, I should follow my own advice. Do I have any other nominations for the chair? That being the case, I do hereby declare Councillor Osborne elected as chair of the meeting.
Got it. Remember which button to press now after 15 months. Anyway, right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for my re-election. Most appreciated. So we carry on now. Item 2, election of vice chairman. Do I have someone to nominate? Nomination for vice chairman. Councillor Gray.
I would like to nominate Councillor Vicky Cook.
Thank you. And do we have a seconder for Councillor Cook?
Yes.
Ooh, loads of them. Councillor Madeley. Seconded. I assume no other nominations? No? Oh, well done, Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much.
Item 3 on the agenda is to authorise me to sign the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny meeting held on the 26th of April as a correct record of the proceedings. You'll happily know that I've just spent 10 minutes signing all the last ones for the last 15 minutes before we started, so because they're all approved. So I have your approval. Can I sign the minutes of the last meeting?
Approved.
Thank you very much. Apologies and substitutions. Councillor Langens.
Yes, I'm substituting for Councillor Sarah Errington tonight.
Knew there was one. I couldn't remember it was you. But that's good. Right. Okay. That's good. No others. And everybody's here, I assume. Yeah. What I should do is welcome Councillor Sam Coleman, who is new to this committee. So welcome, Sam. And even though he's off the leash, he's still here. Councillor Portell has still come. Item 5, additional agenda items. None.
There are none, Chairman.
Item 6, disclosure of interest. Do members have any items they need to declare? I would assume county councillors.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Chairman. Declare an interest in agenda item 9 as executive member of East Sussex County Council, and I'd also declare in obviously 7 and 8 if appropriate, if county council matters are raised.
Okay. Chairman of Council.
Fine. Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just in case it becomes relevant, in item 9, I am an elected member of Bexhill Town Council.
Councillor Clark.
Yeah, same as a member of the East Sussex County Council.
Yeah. And Councillor Coleman.
Yes, also item 9 as a campaigner for both Signets and Rainbows Nursery in the past. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Yes. That's it. Councillor Portell.
Also a campaigner concerning the nursery.
Okay. Right. Okay. Item 7. Recommendations from the Anti-Poverty Task and Finish Group. You see, you'll be aware that we set up an Anti-Poverty Task and Finish Group, which has been ably chaired by Councillor Coleman, and this is the outcome. Joe?
Thank you, Chairman. And yes, just to remind everybody, in January 2020, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee approved the formation of an Anti-Poverty Task and Finish Group that Councillor Coleman chaired. And the terms of reference for that are Appendix A, the report. We were interrupted by COVID, to put it lightly, and has delayed the timeframe somewhat from what you might see in the Appendix A, but we have got there in the end. And just to remind everybody, the Task and Finish Group held 2 events to gather evidence from external partners and a separate event to gather evidence from internal service providers, principally the Housing Needs team, the Housing Benefits and Revenues team, and the Environmental Health team. So the first event was in November 2020, and we invited a host of external partners to provide us with background in terms of the services that they provide locally, whom accesses their services, and to describe the main changes they may have seen in service users' experience in the last few years, particularly with the onset of COVID-19 and what the latest trends are, really. The second event was held on the 9th of December and focused on the internal services. And as I mentioned, Housing Needs, Revenue and Benefits and Environmental Health Services were the focus there. There was also a third presentation to members of the group on the council tax reduction scheme. And that was delivered by a technical consultant to the council in April 2021, and summarised what the schemes do nationally and where other council schemes sits in that spectrum. In general, the evidence gathering sessions, I think, provided positive feedback and showed that there's a real genuine commitment out there to the needs of vulnerable people and those experiencing poverty. However, there was evidence that from the sessions that there are areas for improvement, as one might expect, and the partners that needed to be involved in the delivery of that were mainly present. In principle, the RVA, who chaired the events with us and helped us lead and involve the community and voluntary sectors, their role became increasingly important, I think, as the evidence gathering sessions gathered pace. So to just review those sessions for you very quickly, which is laid out in the report, the two events underlined to members that the causes of poverty are very complicated and complex, as you might expect, and relate across a range of areas: income, health, housing, employment, education, to name the main ones, but there are others. Local providers and council service providers described using a lot of specialist knowledge, and the expertise there is no shortage of. I think locally, knowledge and expertise is out there. What the main challenges proved to be was not necessarily what was on offer, it was how it was coordinated, accessed and promoted. In particular, the coordination of services at a strategic level was disjointed locally, and struggling to coordinate effectively with county-wide initiatives often. And also at operational level as well, there was a disjointed approach to how services were delivered operationally, not everyone always knowing what one another are doing amongst professionals and also amongst the resident service users. It was clear that more education was needed, and that every contact count sort of approach was needed, so that people were more aware of what one another are doing, as I say. And there needs to be greater coordination, in particular between support services, voluntary sector services, and the health sector, and that was particularly disjointed. In terms of access to the internet is imperfect, as we know. There's particular challenges in rural areas. Service locations are distant from one another, and they're not always in the places where people that are convenient to the most people. In terms of promotion, there's very low literacy levels amongst the surprisingly low literacy levels we learnt amongst the general population of 9 years old. But in those experiencing poverty, it's likely to be a lower literacy age, and we rely heavily on writing things and putting things on websites to a group that may not be able to access them readily. On a more positive note, a range of solutions were highlighted, which are at point 15 of the report, and included the promotion of more and creation, I should say, of more hubs where services are co-located in one location, one central location. A street sheet, an ability for people to see and on a map essentially where services are and what they can offer, making every contact count, as I say, about service operational coordination and service knowledge and expertise, and everyone knows who one another is. That digital exclusion was highlighted as an issue, and that efforts need to be made to make digital access more inclusive. There's also the local strategic partnership and the role of the local strategic partnership as a delivery model for many of these recommendations and the delivery of the eventual strategy if it is adopted. And also that there was more that could be harnessed from the goodwill of residents in terms of a philanthropic approach, and asking of people support financially, and artificial intelligence algorithms in terms of promoting greater access. In terms of the council tax reduction scheme that's laid out separately in the report for you, donations, three ideas were sort of are in the report for you to consider. That a greater role of donations and promotion of the council tax reduction scheme and hardship fund be achieved, and to the extent of promoting the scheme in the community, and also considering a donations page to the hardship fund, so that to engender, or to give a platform for people to give money if they wish. Consider increasing the maximum support available once we've achieved our financial stability ambitions, and as you'll know from the medium-term financial plan, and that Cabinet be requested to consult with the public and key stakeholders on access to the council tax reduction scheme for self-employed people specifically, and those who are carers, and those self-employed residents who are registered disabled. So in conclusion, the recommended aims of the strategy are that we coordinate access and promote the services that exist more effectively through a range of ideas that have been put forward and are in need of being fleshed out and developed more coherently, and that the delivery of the strategy be considered, and that the local strategic partnership is in combination, or in collaboration, I should say, with rather voluntary action, is a useful mechanism for us to look at locally for developing and later delivering the strategy once formed. And elsewhere on the agenda, the Overview and Scrutiny Committee may want to consider where the presentation of an eventual strategy might fit into the work programme going forward, probably towards the end of this year. So thank you, and do ask questions. I hope that was a helpful summary. I hope the report is more detailed, and please do ask any questions.
Okay. Councillor Coleman, you as chairman of this group, I'm sure you've got something to add.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And also, really big thank you to Joe and Robin and all the officers and staff involved in helping us come up with this, especially in a time of national crisis. I mean, Joe's sort of worked flat out, and I'm very grateful to Joe for that, as are the rest of the Anti-Poverty Task and Finish group and other members, I'm sure. This was a really important piece of work to put into context for members. The latest government figures from 2019 show there was 4,946 children in poverty in Bexhill and Battle, many of whom will be in Rother, and it's almost certainly over 5,000 following the pandemic. That's in context of 4.3 million children in poverty in the UK, and 14.5 million people in poverty in the UK. Also, to bear in mind that children from Black and minority ethnic groups are twice as likely to be in poverty, and that 75% of children growing up in poverty live in a household where at least one person works. In Rother, we have Sidley, Bexhill Central, and Rye in particular, which are areas of high deprivation and socioeconomic hardship. We also experience a lot of rural poverty in Rother, as the group found out, and obviously the pandemic has just made a lot of that worse. In some areas, it has made it slightly better because of the temporary relief schemes and stuff available, but we know that a lot of people are going to be put into poverty who weren't in poverty before. So it really is important that we tackle poverty, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this piece of work, even though some of the things surrounding poverty might not be directly a Rother idea necessarily. I know East Sussex do a lot with sort of children's services and adult social care and things, and there's a lot of stuff that the voluntary sector can do, but as a district council, we can really play that leading role in sort of coordinating the local effort to tackle poverty. And I'll just close by saying I'd like to propose the recommendations.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair.
Anybody want to second that? And then we'll have a bit of debate. Yes, happy to second that, Councillor.
Yeah, I'm very happy to second that. And I would like to congratulate Councillor Coleman on his chairmanship and for the work he continued to do with Joe Powell in between our meetings. It was very evident that Sam was really delving deep into this with all the information he was able to share with us. But I think we were all a bit surprised at how many agencies were offering help and support, both financial and educational. And under the on page 5, under 15 solutions, we comment that the customer services, the council's customer services team need to be up to date with all initiative grants, charitable organisations, so they can advise residents and enable residents to access the support they require. I think that could also be spread to members. I think many of us around this room here today would welcome pointers so that we can help our residents and those in our wards to access some of these services. So I'm very, very happy to second the proposal to accept these recommendations. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, Chairman. In some ways, I want to concentrate on recommendation 1 and the development of a strategy, because it seems to me that this is an extremely complex area. As we did more and more work, we became more and more aware of some of the pitfalls and the problems. Indeed, even defining poverty itself is a difficult thing. There is a lot of work going on now, because relative poverty, although a very useful concept when it was developed in the 1960s, is probably not the best guide to policy now. We do need to define poverty and what we're going to tackle a little more clearly. But it goes much wider, because this is about people's life chances. This is about their life expectancy. This is a central problem, really, because we're talking about deprivation. And some of the most deprived areas in the country, in this relatively low income area of England, absolutely essential work being done, but not necessarily work that we are terribly familiar with. And it may be this is the right body, or maybe some other body is the right body to oversee what, for example, the local strategic partnership is doing. I had the benefit of seeing it from the other side when I was chairman of the what's really the equivalent of the clinical commissioning group back in the first decade of this century. And so I'm more aware than most of what they were doing then. I find myself horrifically unaware of what they were doing now. And I couldn't find anywhere that we as a council have tapped into that to find out what they're doing, what successes they are, what problems there are, and what our part should be in what is an extremely complex set of partnerships. So working out a strategy to deal with this seems to me a crucial bit of our community leadership role. And probably the more important in a split level authority like ourselves, 3 tiers of government, all involved, the voluntary sector as well. Somebody needs to signpost and to some extent hold everything accountable on behalf of the community. Just a word, I think, on something I learned around public health, which is, of course, life expectancy is not a very sensitive measure when you're trying to decide what is successful and what isn't successful. And what we all know is that probably the key components of that are not within our direct control. They are about employment, education, which is, of course, a county factor. But here, the under 5s is an absolutely crucial part of that role. Because what we know from longitudinal studies of children and their education is that there is a steadily widening gap between those who've actually had a successful experience of mother and toddler groups and play groups going through into primary education. And that gap widens quite steadily from people who've neither had it or had it very badly. And in some ways, it's not just a more shallow rising curve. There is some evidence that in some cases people actually fall back from what was their starting point in the family. Most people are more fortunate than that, but it is a crucial area. Housing, obviously. The interesting thing is the health service can only control things like drugs, alcohol, and even them with great difficulty. Most people's life chances are shaped less by drugs and alcohol and by all the other factors I've mentioned. And that's why I think getting this strategy in place and monitoring it and finding effective ways of monitoring it is a crucial task for this council.
Thank you. Anyone else? No. Councillor Clark.
Mr. Chairman, Councillor Coleman very much summed it up, and there are a number of issues that are very important. People are only on benefits because they are on low incomes and entitled to those benefits. And in Sidley, the population, there are 1,000 people under 25. There's a real issue with young people. And one of the issues the government need to look at, and I know they've made some murmurs in that direction, is improve local transport links, buses. Because in Bexhill, there are no buses after 6 o'clock in the evening. So it's not only just about social inclusion. Young people can't get to youth clubs in Bexhill and get down on the bus, but they'd have to walk home or get the parents to pick them up. Bexhill College, you can get to an evening class, but then you've got to find a way home. And also you've got the issue of people being vulnerable walking home late at night. So there's a lot of social inclusion. And also, if people can get part-time evening jobs, and then got to pay £6 to £7 to get home in a taxi out of their wages. So we could do with some additional funding coming through Sussex to improve bus services, especially in the evenings.
Councillor Mooney.
Is that okay? Is that okay? There's three up here, and one is we all know that it is for people to get onto it when they need money most. There isn't anything about that in here, but I presume that, as Councillor Barnes says, the strategy that is going to be developed in getting that done will see to that, presumably. That's number one. Number two is this public fund. It's almost a crying out scandal that we have to develop a public fund in council. The very people we expect that the hard up are expecting help from, to be dependent on a public fund. It's almost obnoxious, to be honest. And thirdly, what happens when a person is out of work and immediately they have to wait a little time around before they can get the benefit, etc., before the universal credit sets in, etc. Is there a cash point they can go to get some money to put food on the table for the children? Those are real situations. Thank you.
We'll try and field some of them. I might struggle with the second one, but in terms of universal credit, yes, absolutely. Access to universal credit is a key part of the support function of many of the services we spoke to. We do, as a general point, we do need to be realistic about which tiers of government we can directly affect as a council and as a group of local partners. But DWP are very much around the table with us, and locally there's a lot we can do to improve access. But in terms of revolutionising access to universal credit, that's something that would have to happen at Westminster, essentially. The second point, in terms of the public fund, I mean, it's where we are. I can let Robin add to that if he wishes. But and then the last point, in terms of the access to universal credit, there is a hardship fund for universal credit, and you can access what's the right word? Sorry, you can access a forward payment essentially while your claim is processed. But
Okay, good. Am I right in thinking, Councillor Coleman, that you're the council's spokesman on this subject, or am I wrong?
I'm the spokesperson for young people in child poverty, which
So it's
not all poverty, but it's kind of similar.
Near enough.
Yeah.
So from that position, I can assume that with you holding that position, you'll be following this up.
Absolutely, Chair. And I'd hope, just on that subject, that when we're considering our work programme for next year, we consider the group re-establishing once the strategy document is created, to review it and make sure it's sort of delivering on what we want it to. And I'll be happy to be involved again.
Yeah, well, on that sort of subject, what we've done with the car park working group, we've maintained the same membership, and we've sort of morphed into, in a few months' time, we'll be looking at the effect of the on-street parking and reporting back to East Sussex. So therefore, I would assume that your group could remain and do similar in sort of morphing into the next stage to follow this.
Yeah, I mean, I think technically it's a task and finish group. So we had a task and we finished the task, but we may need another task, or we may need to be established as a working group. But task and finish groups do have to finish. But I hope that it can restart with a new task once the strategy is written.
But it would be sensible to use the skills that we picked up from members.
Absolutely.
Rather than, some new ones who might not be up to speed as much. Just my thought. We've been moved to, Councillor Langham.
Just a quick one. Do we have a link on the website for any of these support services so that you can immediately go in and look for something that might be able to help you without having to confront somebody and feel a bit embarrassed about it? Can you look this up?
I haven't looked recently, but I'm fairly certain there is a list of relevant services, but I can double check it and come back to you. Yeah.
That just might be quite useful for people to just sort of pop in and see if there's something that can support them.
Yes.
In the sort of crisis that they're in.
Yeah, absolutely.
And have that sort of link.
I should put in a little shout for our, that's okay, Chair, for our customer services team presently, who are very, very effective signposters and very knowledgeable. There are improvements to be made, of course, but they are, a really valuable resource to us.
Councillor Barnes?
Yes, I think some of our thinking around AI was about enter a problem and you go through an algorithmic process so that you end up actually knowing how that problem is best tackled. And as AI develops, this actually could be a very cost-effective way of signposting, particularly for members, because, as we say, some of the people out there are not really either served digitally or necessarily find it very easy to define their own problem. But certainly some form of AI using for us to signpost what's available, how we contact it, how we help our constituents, I think will be very useful. And of course, the voluntary agencies, again, I think will find that extraordinarily useful.
Councillor Maynard.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. I just want to respond to the earlier points of the Councillor Barnes made regarding the local strategic partnership. And of course, I mean, I've been I declare an interest, firstly, Chairman, as obviously executive member of East Sussex County Council, but to suffice to say that the local strategic partnership is exactly what it says on the tin in terms of is obviously stakeholders and partners of across the public sector engaged in trying to solve some of the major and somewhat smaller problems that exist. I have to say that historically, LSPs on occasion have unfortunately become a reporting mechanism from the various public bodies, and certainly one needs to maintain a focus for specific themes in any given year, and I think we've moved towards that as time has gone on. But I think it's the comment that Councillor Barnes made is a valid one, in that there are and have been annual conferences which have been really useful when they're focused on a particular theme. And the LSPs obviously all feed into the Sussex strategic partnership. But it's important to acknowledge whenever you have public sector sitting around a table, you're very keen to obviously espouse those things that you're doing very, very well. And sometimes it's not so easy to actually confront some of the things that public sector partners aren't doing so well. But I think that there clearly is a role for the LSPs, and provided that they're focused on being outcome driven, they are and should be here for the longer term. We have a little bit more of a difficulty, I think, if I may say so, around some of the protocols and the aims of the ESSP, which hasn't been universally supported by, particularly by the constituent district and borough councils across East Sussex. It tends to be certain councils that have historically turned up regularly, and others who frankly haven't bothered. But it's important that obviously the whole premise of the anti-poverty task and finish route here, and I thank the councillors that have been involved, because I think that obviously anything that brings issues that we can have an input into that can actually bring benefit to those in the greatest need is something we'd all applaud. My only personal, well, not personal, my only comment would be around number 3, as I've said before. It's a little bit disingenuous around this issue. Is a little bit disingenuous because, as I've said before, the cost of this authority of that 20%, maybe 50 to 70,000 has been discussed before, but the overall cost, particularly for the East Sussex County Council, is closer to £500,000. And so, if one was ever thinking of scrapping that council tax reduction scheme, that could actually hit the people that you actually want to protect, because you're taking away effectively across all of the preceptors of East Sussex, I believe, in excess. I mean, Robin Venart will surely correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's in excess of £500,000 across all the different preceptors in East Sussex, or around that kind of figure. Yeah, I'm sure that be so. So that is my if you like, my only concern, and that is why I'm happy to support the recommendation, but with the caveat that, frankly, from my own perspective, and I know that the wording is very careful in 3, but I personally wouldn't be able to support it, number 3, because of that, because I think that we need to be really clear on what we're actually saying there. And it's a little, I mean, okay, we're talking about when the council achieves its financial stability, but it's still, for me, that number 3 doesn't overcome problems that could entail if in fact we've supported it here, but obviously that the cost could be, where are you going to find that extra near £500,000 for the county council year on year? Thank you, Chairman.
Should we, in that case, obviously, Councillor Coleman, you might have an answer.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to clarify on Councillor Maynard's point. Obviously, a lot of the issues he's raised and also the current financial situation is exactly why we've said and Joe's recommended that it's re-looked at when we get to the financial stability ambition that we're pushing for as a council. I think Councillor Maynard's highlighted quite clearly that local authorities are facing a real issue with their finances due to a starvation of government funding over the last 10 or so years. I would hope by the time we achieve our financial stability ambitions, perhaps national government may have had a change of heart and maybe putting some money back in to local government. Perhaps all local authorities would be a little bit more stable and able to correct this, what I consider a wrong. because it's very easy to add a cap. It's very hard to take a cap away. But we did hear from when we had our research session from the I forget what the term is now, outside person who came in. There are other authorities who have a smaller percentage. There are some who have none. Hastings just next door, for example. There are some who have higher. There was one authority that has a 50% cap, which is just outrageous. And we are very firmly in the middle. So there is precedent to go further and to provide a little bit of extra support for those on the lowest incomes. But I appreciate what Councillor Maynard says, that currently there isn't the resources in local authorities to burden that loss of income.
Just to
got one on somewhere. No? No, he's back.
back. Oh, filled up the inch. I just wanted to highlight. Yeah, I'll pick that one. I just wanted to highlight, even as part of that recommendation, that ultimately when it comes back to council to take that view, they will have to go out to consultation with all major preceptors anyway. So at that point, if the decision of the council is to go out with a recommendation to increase the level of support, that would be subject to the views and comments of councils such as East Sussex, but also the wider community as well. So it's not a guarantee. It's almost like a recommendation to Cabinet to consider that at that point in time, that we achieve our own financial stability, and hopefully, as Councillor Coleman said, that the other councils are also in a similar position.
Depends on your, if I may, Chairman, it depends on your perception of financial stability, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There is an option, Chairman. I mean, you can either take these on block or take each as a recommendation on its own and vote and have 4 separate votes, and then that allows people to, if they have reservations on something, to express that at that point in time.
Is that what you would prefer, Councillor Maynard? You prefer to take
I'm actually quite relaxed, although I do believe that once again, you know, it's. I know Councillor Coleman and I have a fundamental disagreement on the scheme and its benefits or not, but I'm quite comfortable either way. I don't know what other members. Await what other members' comments are.
Okay, Councillor Langlands, did you indicate?
It was just a quick question with regards to the cost of recouping council tax that isn't actually paid anyway. I mean, would that actually influence whether it's worth reducing it? Because surely there is a cost to get the money in that you've actually not acquired because people are unable to pay.
There is a process by which we go through in order to recover unpaid council tax. Ultimately, we would take the person to court and get a liability order against them in order to recover the money. At some point, yes, people will either enter into some kind of voluntary arrangement. You have all sorts of mechanisms now in order to relieve debt. So and that's quite often why we will write debt off ultimately, is because courts have instructed that those debts be relieved and people aren't liable for them anymore. So there is processes around that. In terms of the council tax reduction scheme itself, what we also look at is the, as you said, the cost benefit around a very small amount being charged to everybody. Therefore, is it cost effective to try and recover that in itself? Because of the process of recovering small amounts of money, the economies of scale start to be lost. But generally speaking, the level it is at the moment, it is economic to recover. The performance of the team and, you know, to the credit of the public to be able to pay has shown that it is worthwhile maintaining that 20% minimum payment. But it is something we would obviously need to consider at the time later on.
So you would take that into consideration when you were doing your stability and how much you were.
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I would have considerable hesitations about wiping it out altogether. because I think the dignity of the people we're helping is important. I don't think they should be made wholly dependent on the state. That said, I think Councillor Angers makes a very important point about cost, but the difficulty is we are the collecting authority for all the other authorities. So working out what the return is, it's not just about our money. The fire service, the police, we're all in this, but the big one obviously is the county council.
Councillor Courtauld.
Thank you. I'd just like to make an observation on what Councillor Maynard said, which is that people over 65 do have full 100% discount on the council tax reduction scheme, i.e. they don't pay. So how does he ethically justify the fact that people over 65 have that reduction, but people under 65 do not? Can I carry on with my other points?
I'm not sure on the sort of relevance of that. I know you're making a point, but to this.
Well, it's simply that he's saying that it's unaffordable to East Sussex County Council, but it's affordable to East Sussex County Council, apparently, for people over 65 not to have to pay council tax. So,
Councillor Coleman, can you answer?
Yeah, just perhaps to clarify Councillor Courtaild's comments. I think the fact that people over 65 are entitled to 100% reduction is because the government give them that 100% reduction, and in fact, it's a legal requirement of the government to do so. In my personal view, it should be a legal requirement for the government to offer that to all citizens, as I'm sure Councillor Courtauld would agree. But we are where we are, and where we are is that someone who's 64 can't get 100%, and someone who's 65 can. And I would hope that one day we can maybe change that, but in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Well, we've got it moved and seconded. We've had a fair debate on it. If you're happy to take all four in one go.
I'll go along with the four, but I would like to that scrubbed out. The potential of setting up a public fund making contributions. I don't think that's what we should be aiming.
What was the angle of that one coming from? You're the chairman of the group. You must have come up.
Yeah, so very much it wasn't a replacement of what we currently offer. That's very clear. And I would object to that on that basis. This was in addition to if residents wanted to give charitably to help those lesser off, then why not make a mechanism for them to be able to do so voluntarily? Unfortunately, we are in the circumstances where we are, where we haven't got the finances to offer as generous packages as we would perhaps like. And if there are residents living in wherever in Rother who maybe have some spare money in their pocket and would like to give it to those in need, we as a council know where then that need is, and our hardship fund would be a place they might perhaps want to give it. I think that was the idea behind it. I think most of the group supported that.
Right. Councillor Barnes?
Just to reassure Councillor Rennie, we asked the officers to review this. We're not committed to it at the moment because there is no mechanism by which this can be done. But it's not a bad idea if somebody has some money that they want to actually help people with, to use the mechanism that's already there, rather than create a new one. So I think we're right to be exploring it at this moment. We can take a decision in principle if you want, but I think at this moment I would not take it out.
Well, we're recommending this up to Cabinet anyway, so Cabinet can look at it as they feel fit. They generally go with what we sort of offer them. Councillor Drayson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm guessing it's along the lines of even if you buy a ticket for the Delaware, you get to the checkout page and it says with or without a donation. Most garages now you want to round it up to the nearest pound. I'm guessing that's it. It's that idea that ask someone to pay something if they want to. They will be asked if you want to contribute to it, but at least we would know where it's going to, unlike I don't know where the garage money actually goes to.
Right. So if you're in agreement, then we've got it moved and seconded. So we'd take all four of them, I think, in one go. All those in favour? And an abstain against, or an abstain? No, that's fine. Okay, well, that's carried. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to work out how to go to the next one. Item 8. Resolve that Cabinet be requested to agree that financial assistance policy 21-25 be recommended to Council for adoption, and initially £200,000 allocated from the disabled facilities. What's a DTPG? Disabled discriminatory. Yeah, one of those. Be held in earmarked reserves. Joe on this one.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, just for members, it's the Discretionary Disabled Project Grant, which I'll come on to shortly. But the Council must have an adopted financial assistance policy to be able to provide disabled facilities grants, which I hope most members are familiar with. The money is provided through the Better Care Fund, and the proposed financial assistance policy can be found at Appendix A. DFGs are included in the policy of the financial assistance policy, or the administration of DFGs, disabled facilities grants, and they're an essential means of improving the health, well-being of residents who experience disability and mobility impairments through the provision of grants to make adaptations principally to people's homes. It is also proposed, as the Chairman highlighted, that a new discretionary disabled project grant be introduced as part of the policy to enable the Council to spend its full or complement the Better Care Fund and allow us to spend the full allocation of grant that we receive annually. It will remain prioritised, the grant, for DFG use, and that the proposal is that a ring-fenced amount of £200,000 be allocated to the DDPG from earmarked reserves using previous years underspent to in first instance see what the demand is locally in the community for such grants. So to just the way the grant will operate is detailed in the report, but I'll quickly summarise for you. Those of you that are familiar with the community grant scheme, it will be a very similar process to that. We have included at Appendix B actually an example of the grant form, so you can familiarise yourself with the sorts of things we'll be asking. In the panel of relevant council officers and our colleagues who are co-located with us from East Sussex County Council, occupational therapy representation on that board, making the decisions on grant applications, as well as the portfolio holder for housing. The grant is intended to support smaller projects that are easily deliverable by community groups, and again, focused on improving adaptations and access to disabled people in various contexts in public buildings, parks and open spaces, etc. And applicants will be invited to provide responses to a number of priorities which are set out at point 15 of the report, against which their applications will be assessed, essentially a criteria of sorts. So it's recommended that the financial assistance policy be adopted, or recommended that to Cabinet that it be adopted. And yes, I'm happy to take questions on the report and the appendices.
Okay,
thank you.
Councillor Maynard.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And certainly the underspend has been a vexatious issue for a number of years. So I'm really pleased to see the report come forward. I just want to be really clear though, and people call me a lot of things, but pedantic I don't think is one of them. But I just want to check that in 5.1 we talk about obviously individuals applying for these grants, and quite clearly further on in the report, particularly obviously in terms of the summary of the way the scheme works, we can see that it's very similar to the community grant scheme. But what I want to be clear on with the if you like, the pack that we would send out with any grant applications, what I wouldn't want to see, and I wouldn't want there to be any confusion, is when we say individuals can apply, that we're not going to welcome applications from people living in, obviously, their own homes that have perhaps been unsuccessful in getting a DFG grant, but think this is another vehicle for them to apply, for example, if they've perhaps got too much money in the bank, etc., etc. So the last thing we would want to see is confusion. So I just want to be really clear that there's a rider in here, or when we send out the pack, that it's really, really clear that this is meant to be, obviously, for groups that will benefit the whole community, parish councils, faith groups, non-for-profit organisations. But when we say individuals, I just think that's a little bit too ambiguous. We just need to be really clear that this isn't another way you can get a DFG in your own home, so that there isn't any confusion for residents, so that we're absolutely clear about what it is that this scheme should deliver.
Okay, is that covered anywhere, Joe?
It's just use casual language, I imagine, in the report, which I can amend before it's taken to
So-
cabinet.
Suitably assured, Jim.
Yeah, so I assume that if you're in a rented property, social housing, whatever, you can apply easy. But if you own your own large house and you've got a lot of money in the bank, why should we pay for your standard share?
That's right. So in answer to Councillor Maynard's point, I think if I've understood correctly, it is not possible to get the project grant for individuals. That is for groups and organisations. In answer to your question, Councillor, it's the mandatory disability facilities grants are means tested.
That's it, means tested. That's all right.
That's brilliant. As long as we've got that language within the pack, I'm perfectly happy, Jim.
Good. And Councillor Clark?
Thanks, Chairman. Well, probably Joe can guide me where the finance comes from, but in my ward, there's been about 6 in the last year of tenants on housing associations who've had wet rooms and stairlifts put in, and it costs around £5,000 or £6,000. Well, what it does mean also with Lifeline, that person who lives alone can be supported and still stay there. Because the alternative to that is they go into nursing home and it costs £2,500 a month, and that what's cost that conversion is wiped out in 2 months. Apart from the people who want the dignity of being able to still live in their own home and with support. So I don't know where the money comes from for health association, but it's certainly something that they are actively involved in. There's been 5 in my ward in the last 6 months, I think. So it makes sense. It really does.
Yep. Good. Councillor Drayson?
Thank you. I just wanted to take over Councillor Maynard's pedantry. It says here on the application form, it's name of councillor supporting this application. Generally in community grants, it is the ward councillor. I sometimes have problem with groups because they, like, if it's a Bexhill-based group, they may not be in a particular ward. So I'm just wondering, should it say ward councillor and it should go with the address of the name of the main contact, it says? Should it be that ward councillor, or can it be any councillor?
Sure, we can cross that bridge.
Yeah, there's really no reason it can't be any councillor. So I'll certainly I'll amend that.
Anybody got anything to say on it that's relevant to what we've been told? This is we got the update here. We as a council have no sway over the usage. Do we agree with?
There is a restriction on the land lease, which is detailed out in the report, but the proposed use that East Sussex the use that East Sussex are proposing in partnership with the NHS is consistent with that, as per the legal advice we've received.
Okay, okay. Councillor Coleman?
Thank you, Chair. And I redeclare my interest as a former, well, I'm still campaigner for the 2 nurseries in Bexhill. I think the history of this is a very sad one, of East Sussex County Council having 2 Ofsted outstanding nurseries that were full to capacity and were doing very, very well indeed. So much so that the the party in power at county was using their outstanding ratings on their recent election leaflets. The two nurseries were great, and for some bizarre reason, county decided to close them, and that's why we are where we are. I sat in that meeting where even the local Conservative councillors, to their credit, Councillor Ensor and Councillor Elford, were speaking against the idea. Liberal Democrats, Labour councillors all spoke against the idea, but the Conservative member in charge of Children's Services said, no, we are closing it. We're not having any further discussion. That's the decision. And thus embarked several years of campaigning from myself, from others, from councillors in this room, from people who are now town councillors, from people who are still just residents, parents, nursery workers, people who do not want to see Bexhill lose its two outstanding affordable nurseries. We managed to save Sidley, and the Bexhill Family Collective, who are now in there running Dragonflies nurseries, has been a great success in Sidley House. Absolutely tremendous success. And I so hope that somehow that success can be replicated in Edgerton Park Children's Centre. But alas, here we are with supposedly no direct power to do anything about this. East Sussex seem to be clearly wanting to give the site to the NHS, and I support giving the NHS a site. Don't get me wrong, it's a really important service that the NHS want to deliver, and there are lots of sites in Bexhill where I think they could deliver it. But Edgerton Park Children's Centre, the legacy of the Sure Start project, absolutely fundamental, as we heard from Councillor Barnes, to increasing children's life chances. The disparity between children in poverty and children not in poverty, and whether or not they've been to nursery or had some kind of childcare is clear. We don't have direct power, but perhaps we have some kind of soft power. And certainly some councillors in this room and outside of this room have been emailing County Council, asking them to reconsider, emailing Keith Glazier, asking him to ask his officers to reconsider. We also have the Bexhill Town Council recently set up, another tremendous success story. And they are possibly looking at taking on the Edgerton Park Children's Centre building as their home, perhaps, is one of their options. And they're very open to leasing out half of the building to a nursery of some kind in its place. We have the Bexhill Family Collective, who run the nursery in Sidley, who I'm sure would be up for discussions about running a nursery as some of them did before in Edgerton Park Children's Centre. So we have options. There are things, there are mechanics that are in place where we could possibly see a nursery retained in that site. And I don't know that if we lose this site for childcare for this purpose, whether there'll be enough momentum, enough energy left in those who have been campaigning for years tirelessly to keep their nursery open to find another venue. Whereas I think we can find another venue for the NHS service. And so I really hope, I ask all the councillors here, if we can't do anything as a council, that we try our best to do something as individuals to give children, especially those in poverty, affordable childcare at the hours of working parents, because whilst East Sussex will tell you, and I've read the reports many times now, that there is sufficient childcare out there, it is not for the hours that is needed, it is not at the cost that is needed. And so there are children in Bexhill Central and around that area who will be struggling to find nursery places as a result of this. And so I just ask everybody to please consider writing to the County Council, talking with your local Bexhill Town Councillor if you're a Bexhill councillor, having those conversations, especially those who are members of the party in administration at County Council, because you have the power. You have the power to change this. So please do. We do not, according to the officers, have that power. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dishery.
Thank you. I'm going to come up with an unpopular view now. I realise there's a lot of support and a lot of need for a nursery, but I think we've got to accept it's not going to happen at Edgerton Park. And I just think an awful lot of time, waste and energy is going on focusing on that building rather than focusing on finding something which is actually doable and something that could be used with equal success. It doesn't have to be in Edgerton Park, which we know, as I say, the County Council are adamant, and I don't believe we're ever going to change their mind. And now the Town Council are focused on it as well. And I think that it's just a lot of energy and time going on something that's not going to be winnable. Sorry.
I don't want to sort of shut it down, but to be honest, yeah, as I've said, and there's nothing we can talk about this all night, but we're not going to change anything because it's not within our gift as a council. The building is literally there. It's not our lease, it's not our building, it's not anything. So, is there any point to the discussion, to be honest? We've got a report, we asked for a report to come back, it's there. Councillor Barnes?
Yes, I wanted to correct an impression which I think it's quite important to correct. There was no mood at county to disadvantage under fives. The policy that altered was that in regard to children's centres. I lost one in my own ward because of the physical cost of keeping those centres going. What the decision was taken, given scarce resources, that you should get the service safe and not necessarily deliver it through the centres. The knock-on effect of that, of course, was to create a problem in Bexhill, which is one of the few areas that actually we directly provided under five education. Across most of the area, indeed in most towns, the provision is either charitable or private or both. So I think there was a will from county to try to find a solution. I think, therefore, if we're going to find a solution, the most obvious one to my mind, and I still think it's worth exploring, is actually cooperation with the NHS. Are we certain they need the full building? But that's not within our gift here. That is something we would have to raise as supporters of the playgroup with the NHS. At the moment, they're saying no. And that's a real problem. The alternative is to do as Councillor Williams says, and that is find a plan B. What I think we really do need to emphasise is the need to find a solution for signets because they have a waiting list. They are an extremely valuable resource, catering for a deprived area of Bexhill. And I'm much keener on what I would say is the imperative, which is finding a solution, than trying to find a particular solution. I regret it. Edgecombe Park can't be made available. And I would urge the NHS to look at whether you can make better use of that building by cooperating with the under fives rather than having exclusive NHS use. But if that's not possible, then really we should be, as community leaders, trying to find a solution that is as satisfactory as the one that has been found at Sidley.
Well, I need this. The recommendation is the report be noted. I'm sorry, I can't see the point of talking about something we can do nothing about. To be honest, we can't do anything
Chair,
about it.
as Councillor Coleman said, we may not have direct power, but we do have influence.
I would remind members, as I have done in emails, this is not a Rother District Council service. All we have is an issue where we have leased land where East Sussex Council have built a building. We do not provide a service in that building. They provide a service in that building. They have, I think, 9 years of the lease left to run. And they're basically within the restrictions of that building, which I have to say does not include office accommodation for any organisation, which would certainly be outside not only the lease, but the current planning permission and would probably breach the covenant on the land. So at the end of the day, all we can deal with is the building issue. And we can't do anything about that. Councillor Coleman has made a perfectly valid point that there are members here who are very passionate about the service that's being provided in that area. And that is absolutely right that members should be very passionate about that. But this is not either the meeting or the environment, and neither should this council be used to directly influence a service that is provided by another council. By all means, have those discussions and speak to the relevant county councillors. But I would remind members that this discussion tonight is about a building where East Sussex County Council have 9 years of a lease left on. And therefore, the discussion should be had with East Sussex County Council if there are discussions to be had, not with Rother District Council. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor.
One last question then. In terms of the lease then, and its sole use as a centre for early education, childcare, health and family support, can we as a council be assured that the NHS will conform to that and will not deviate from that use? That's my real concern. I think that it gets watered down and the early years is lost, and the education of young children there is lost.
East Sussex County Council have assured us and showed us the proposals that the NHS have want to put into that centre on the basis that we wanted to ensure it was sort of in line with what the lease provisions were. There's no reason to distrust what the NHS are going to deliver there in that point. Obviously, if that changes into the future, we'll come back to inform members and make the relevant decision in line with what East Sussex have said. I would say that obviously the lease to East Sussex outlines what can be done there, and therefore the sublease to the NHS will also outline that. So they will be held to those same restrictions as part of their lease, in the same way that East Sussex are as part of the lease with us.
Last one, Councillor Drayson, Chair of the Council.
Thank you. I just wanted to restate my interest as an elected member of Bexhill Town Council, and just wanted to say they have not made a decision. They have had one meeting so far. The working group has had one meeting, and they're reporting back to full council on Wednesday night. So please don't assume that Bexhill Town Council have done anything or have a specific interest in this building. People are speaking in various places about Bexhill Town Council, and Bexhill Town Council have not yet decided.
Right, the report is being noted. Someone can move to be report being noted. Councillor Coleman moved.
No, I'll move the report and can also suggest, Chair, that when it comes to looking at the, I believe it's called the Town Hall renovation or whatever, the Renaissance, when we look at the Renaissance of the Town Hall in Scrutiny, that we consider looking at perhaps installing a childcare centre as part of that building package as maybe a plan B, C or D. But anyway, I'll move this report, Chair.
Okay. All those in favour of an aye? For a seconder, Councillor Cook.
Happy to second.
Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Performance report, fourth quarter. Resolved that the Overall Scrutiny Committee consider these findings and recommend any action to Cabinet as necessary. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so this is the fourth quarter performance report for the 2020 to 2021 financial year. Obviously, the last financial year. Members will note that there are a lot of missed targets. I would say, if you hadn't noticed, it was a bit of a strange year. Somewhat diverted in our attentions towards other things. I'm happy to answer questions as and where possible, and try not to blame everything on COVID, but to be fair, there were some aspects of that. I mean, to be fair, there are some aspects that weren't, in terms of housing supply and so on and so forth. We were always likely to miss what were the stretch targets. But I'm happy for members to raise anything, and I'll answer questions as and where possible.
I suppose contractual missed bins by a little tick. Probably because everybody was at home, so they remembered to put the plastic thing out.
Gleaming beam of sunshine in a red mist in this report, yes.
Councillor Langham.
Can I just ask if we have any figures that actually influence whether these performance indicators have gone up or down. I mean, in terms of not necessarily relating to COVID. For example, the car parking income. Now, you could say that was related to COVID because nobody was using their car and things. But have we got any recent data that's telling us that actually everyone's back out on the road again and the car parking income is still not coming in? You know, have we got that sort of thing? Or in terms of our accommodation, temporary accommodation, is that sort of have we got any recent indications that that's getting better?
Yeah, we continue to monitor a lot of these. I mean, some of them appear on this year's KPI set, and we'll be reporting Q1 outputs. Probably September time usually is when we get Q1 outputs to this committee. So yeah, we continue to monitor. I don't have anything at hand at the moment because we report it quarterly. But yeah, of course, this committee will see those results as soon as they come in. Q1.
Well, funnily enough, Councillor Langham, Canberra car parking was above performance last year, and so far probably this June it's probably been above it because I think someone said it was full by 10:30 on Sunday. But you wouldn't want to go today because you couldn't see the beach today for fog. So if you'd driven from somewhere and got within 3 miles of Canberra, you wouldn't have found it. You'd have been severely disappointed looking for a sunny beach. Anyway, any more questions on this one? Councillor Barnes?
Not a question. I think the most worrying one is in Appendix A. And I just wonder whether as an authority, we ought to be talking with other authorities that have as much protected land as we have. I've identified 20 others in the southeast who have 80% or more of their land protected. They all have high housing targets, which they going to find impossible to deliver. And it does seem to me we need to work with partners to try to get the government to realise that an area like ours simply is not going to be able to deliver a housing target calculated in the way that it's currently calculated. We either need some national abatement formula because the MPPF is very clear that we have to protect the A&B. The law is very clear that we don't have to affect wetlands adversely. And so to rely simply on going forward to the local plan inspection and argue our case individually, surely what we now need to do is to work with other local authorities in a similar plight to make a case for a national abatement formula. And I hope we could recommend to Cabinet that they take that action.
Chairman, I was just going to suggest, I mean, often this goes forward with no recommendation from this committee, and that would seem to be, you know, a tangible recommendation that could go forward to Cabinet and on from there.
Yeah. We have a formal words for that.
I think Councillor Barnes summed it up quite nicely.
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Are we happy with the rest of it as is?
Yeah, just for clarity, I think it is Councillor Barnes is recommending that we work with them with authority to have the same land protection levels that we have to try and argue with the government for a different approach to the housing number.
The two issues that I'd like looked at, and I set a minimum level of 80%. We are right at the top end, it's over 90. But it seems to me 80 is a very reasonable level to set for authorities. And an abatement formula would be my desired outcome.
As I said, Chairman, Councillor Barnes summed it up very nicely. Yeah.
Yep. You're seconded. Yeah, cool. Everybody happy with that? All in favour? Good, thank you very much. Work programme.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on the work programme, and there's a covering report which basically talks about the work that has been done this year and the issues that have been delivered. And I think that there's been quite the steering groups and etc. have actually had a major impact over the last year. Also, a reminder on the report that the crime and disorder, this committee acts as the crime and disorder committee for the council, and that's something we shouldn't underestimate or undervalue in any way, because I think particularly in an area that is like Rother, which is quite diverse, the nature of our crimes can be quite diverse, from the rural areas through to the urban areas. The work programme is assessed and looked at every meeting. I would stress it is your work programme. It is not, and so it is for members, for officers to suggest, but also for members to suggest items that can go on the work programme. And basically, you can put anything on there that is relevant to the services that this council performs. We do have a limit. I think it's is it 4, Louise, of working groups or task and finish groups at any one point in time, which was why I did appreciate Councillor Coleman's suggestion earlier that we actually dissolve. It's a task and finish group, so by definition, it does a task and finishes it. That's not to say that you don't resurrect it at another point in time, but it keeps us in the clear with that. And the reason for those, just to remind members, was that it often you find the strain on task and finish groups can fall on 1 or 2 service areas, and it's to try and avoid having too much going on in any one service area. There are a number of things on items for consideration that you'll see on page 69, which have been given a priority rating. You may or may not agree with that priority rating. The corporate plan review, I'll just suggest that will be agreed at the next, or the corporate plan itself will be agreed at the next cabinet meeting. So it's probably worth keeping that on there as a reminder that it will need a review, but rather than put a defined date on it. But there are other things in there that you may wish to have a look at. For instance, tonight we mentioned the draft anti-poverty strategy proposals. Well, perhaps we will, as the year goes on, we'll look at when does that slot in? When do we need to deal with that? The progress of the environment strategy, which you could possibly argue the litter strategy is a subset of, if you like, since there is an undoubted connection, is something that I think is increasingly important, because it was 2 years ago we said that we would be carbon neutral by 2030, and we're 2 years on. And it's not that long to 2030, so that does need to be focused on and delivered. On Appendix 2, you've got the sort of current programme and subject matter. You will notice that what we try to do at every meeting is to have one main item. I have to say we generally miserably fail in this aim, because it usually is most of the items turn out to be things people or members want to talk about, but we try and have a main item and also then have other items that we add to the agenda, you want on the agenda. I think they're just looking through the list, you will see that for the 19th of July meeting, you've got one item on the agenda. I would have to say, if you said you wanted something extra on that agenda by this point in time, we might be a little bit tight to get a report and get it finalised. But I mean, you might want to, at that, is almost to have the, I'm not saying you should defer it from tonight if you want to make a decision, but for members to look again at those items for consideration, and perhaps the opportunity could be on the meeting on the 19th to say, well, let's have a focus on those items and let's see what we want and potential timescales for that to happen. But like I said, I would remind it is your work programme for you to suggest things to go on it. It is for all members collectively to agree whether those go on it. So that, again, I would just stress that as is an issue for all members. At that point, Chairman, I'll take any questions if there are any.
Okay, if I start, I get a kick. Planning department. Now, the plan, when I went to the cabinet 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about things, and I sort of brought up, and I maybe I got the sort of the gist wrong. I thought the planning committee looked after the work of the planning department. It reported, quarterly or every couple of months or whatever to the planning committee. So I sort of mentioned this at cabinet and thinking I was going to get sort of shot down and pushed down the stairs or something. But it seemed that the cabinet were sort of almost not against the idea of actually doing some sort of scrutiny on the planning department. Now, my argument was, and would be, if the planning department are busy, then we don't want to take them off kilter, off scheme, if you like, doing a report and doing a scrutiny. But then equally, I was told that the figures are there to look at. But I'm just going on, at the moment, and I expect most of us, if not a fair few of us, have had people ringing who have made plan applications, and then they don't hear anything for 3 months. And it hasn't even been validated. And they don't know, the agent doesn't know if it's going anywhere, the applicant doesn't know if it's going anywhere. And then when they do finally look at it, it might say, oh, you haven't signed, page, box F. So they send it back, and then you're back to square one, and you haven't actually got anywhere. And all you want to do is change the front door, get Mermaid Street front door from blue to light, potentially. So, is that something that can be done? I don't know.
Can I just say, Chairman, there's a lot of work going on with the planning department. There's been a review. I would suggest that perhaps if that is something Scrutiny are minded to do, they put it on the work programme for perhaps a few months down the line when we've got the opportunities to implement some of that review and start to see there's extra resources, as you know, going in there to see that it's actually making a difference. But it is for Scrutiny to decide what it wants its work programme to be.
Yeah, if we've got a problem, we had a problem with benefits and revenues, and we solved that. It's working well. Robin's not said yes, but he's working well. And again, if we have trouble with bin collections or whatever, we would look into that and delve into it. And the sort of services that the man on the street sees, or the only contact he has with the council, is having his bins empty, having his streets clean, and once in a blue moon they put in a plan application. So that's all. That's what I'm thinking. Councillor May.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I think we're in danger of having the debate that Malcolm suggested that we have in July, and we have got a very light, one would think it's a very light agenda for the 19th of July meeting, and actually having a focus on the sort of things that we want in the work programme. And dare I be slightly flippant and suggest that we might look at it on a slightly different approach, whereby we could look at the themes that we want to cover off, rather than just the specific issues that are in there. What are the likely things over a year of council business that you want to actually focus on? So I think that Malcolm's suggestion is a very sensible, very pragmatic suggestion that I think would appeal to most members of the Scrutiny Committee.
Good idea. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to propose that the environment strategy is reviewed every 6 months instead of annually. We had the first review of progress on the 15th of March. That was after the initial 6 months. And I do think we need to keep a close eye on the environment strategy if we are to fulfil our aim of being carbon neutral by 2030. So I think every 6 months would help us to achieve that.
Does it get reported to Cabinet?
No. Sorry, I don't think so. So, which is why I think Councillor Gray's suggestion is a good idea, because I think if for no other reason than it is a key plank of what this authority is trying to do, and therefore I think it's important that a focus is maintained on it. So that would seem to indicate that it either goes to it would either be the September or March one, but September or October. So I managed to lose 6 months in there, 7 months somewhere.
Councillor May.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to propose that the environment strategy is reviewed every 6 months instead of annually. We had the first review of progress on the 15th of March. That was after the initial 6 months. And I do think we need to keep a close eye on the environment strategy if we are to fulfil our aim of being carbon neutral by 2030. So I think every 6 months would help us to achieve that.
Does it get Okay, Councillor Barnes.
I looked at the first page of Appendix 1, in fact, Appendix 1 itself, and I can't quite see where some of these things are going to slot into the programme. I'd have thought that one of those might have been accommodated in July. I don't know whether the tourism strategy is ready. It's got a high priority. I've got a lot of sympathy for Councillor Gray's suggestion, although it's such an important part of the corporate plan. I would have hoped the Cabinet was going to review it more frequently. If it's got to come to us and then be recommended to Cabinet, so be it, because it is crucial, and it should be one of the indicators we look at quarterly. But I would have hoped Cabinet themselves were going to do a regular review of the situation.
More should become clear after the reports on Cabinet, the next Cabinet. Sorry, Ben.
Ben.
I was just going to remind members that there is a dedicated steering group for the environment strategy and climate change strategy, which obviously meets much more regularly as well. So it is being, also has Cabinet members something on it. So just sort of to reiterate the point that is being monitored quite, quite heavily. It's just about the role that scrutiny plays in that, and that's for the members of this committee to decide.
I suppose then almost we could just get an update in that group committee. Something relevant. Okay. Councillor Common.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. I don't know, Malcolm might be able to answer this, whether this is something that Scrutiny can look into, but I think it would be good, as we have a seat on the board of Sea Change, whether we have a look at how they're performing. I think it's in the interest to make sure that organisations we're involved with are performing well. Is that something we could perhaps look at? I don't know.
Can I have a discussion outside this meeting, if I may? In principle, yes, I think you're right. I mean, where we have representation, I think that is correct. But I think there are some things that probably it would be useful to have a discussion, and then we can come back to that one if you still feel it's appropriate.
Yeah. Well, Councillor Dixon is there.
Yes, it is Councillor Dixon at the moment. Yeah.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid I've got 4 little comments to make. Firstly, I do second Councillor Gray's desire for the scrutiny group to look at the environment strategy on a 6-monthly basis. I think that would be really, really helpful. Secondly, Councillor Dixon has asked me to promote the review of the tourism strategy, but I think as there's been very little tourism, there's probably very little to review at the moment, and I would like to suggest that perhaps that's something we could look at towards the latter half of this year, when hopefully this summer might produce some tourists that we can actually talk about. Secondly, I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Osborne, about the planning situation. I wonder if we could add it to KPIs. How many, for example, how many planning applications do we receive? How many are, resolved? How many are appealed? How many, how long does it take for some of these things to go through? Is that something we could do?
Yeah, I think that's reported to planning committee. Is that right?
Yeah, all of those are reported to planning committee. At the last cabinet, it was decided that this committee would also include in that KPI set 2 KPIs from planning, which is, I think, the total average number of days for a major application to be determined, and the total number of days on average for a minor application to be determined. So it will be included in the KPI set. Not all of those figures that you've said, but some headline ones that you can then sort of drill down into if you wanted to.
That's lovely. Thank you for reassuring me that. Thank you for that. That's very helpful. When we were talking about the anti-poverty task and finish group, one of the suggestions that was made was about customer services and ensuring that they're well informed with all the various things that are around. So I would like to propose that the draft corporate customer services strategy is certainly something that we should be scrutinising and giving our support to this year. Thank you.
Thank you. And on that, I know that Joe Powell and Mark Adams are working on it. And when we discuss it at the next meeting, we can probably, come up with a date when we'll be looking at that. So I think that I'd agree with that one, Jeff.
Okay, good. Councillor Cortell.
I'm concerned about the annual review of the homelessness strategy. I'm disappointed that it's got a priority weighting of 2, and I'd like to suggest to the committee that you might consider increasing that to 1. And in the same way as Councillor Gray has suggested that the environment strategy be considered twice a year, I'd like to suggest that for the homelessness strategy. The reason is because there are 2 major factors outside our control which are going to affect it. First, the tapering of furloughing, and secondly, the ending of the moratorium on evictions. Both decisions of government, but they are likely to have significant pressure on homelessness. So I think it's something that we need to monitor.
Yeah, can I just say, Chairman, I think there's a difference between reviewing the incidence of homelessness and reviewing the homelessness strategy. And I think the homelessness strategy, you're quite right, does need a regular review, but also this committee does receive information on people in temporary accommodation, etc. So that's the opportunity for a discussion on the impact of various things on that. I understand what Councillor Cortell's saying, but I think that it's not given 2 because it's low. It's given 2 because actually this committee receives regular information on it and on the implications of it. I think that doesn't mean that every 6 months you want to be changing your strategy.
It's helpful. Can I formally move what Malcolm originally suggested? I think that's.
Yeah, we can discuss this at the next meeting. Yep. Happy with that? Councillor Barnes, go on.
Yes, I think it's Malcolm's just made a very helpful comment. I think there is a danger if we dig up the strategy every so often and take a look before it's had a chance to be implemented. Monitoring the outcomes is crucial, and that they should be, if we think they're important, be in the quarterly outcomes. I think there are 1 or 2 members who are thinking we have to review the whole strategy the whole time to identify what's going wrong and what's going right. We can do that if we get the right measures coming forward in our quarterly reports. And I think possibly we could spend some time in our next meeting just making sure we have got the right indicators. We did debate this quite recently, but a couple of things have come up today, which I think trying to identify what indicator we'd like to see would be very useful. I think that's particularly true of climate.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I think it's fair to say that Ben has got all the indicators in a drawer somewhere, and if one of them starts to bounce out the drawer and go bad, then we generally get told of it. That's fair.
Yeah, that's a fair point. We have a number of sort of health check indicators for the whole council, most of which Malcolm will get to see on a month-by-month basis. If anything starts getting unwieldy or out of hand, it'll be reported to this committee.
Okay, thank you. Right, well, if that's that's what we do then. So I declare the meeting closed at, what's that? By the town hall clock, which we haven't seen for a long time, 9 minutes past 8. Thank you very much for your attendance.